The automatic doors of St. Augustine Medical Center's emergency room slid open at 3:12 a.m., and Dr. Imani Clark looked up from suturing a skateboard injury to see something that would alter the course of her life forever. A man moved through the fluorescent-lit chaos with the kind of controlled stillness that made even the most jaded night shift nurses pause mid-conversation. Tall, lean, dressed in dark clothing that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, with sharp cheekbones and eyes like winter frost. He moved alone, no entourage, no backup, but something about the deliberate economy of his movements, the way his gaze cataloged exits and people with military precision, made the space around him feel charged with danger. One hand pressed against his ribs where dark crimson soaked through an expensive black shirt. But it was the way he carried himself, like someone who had made peace with death long ago and was only mildly inconvenienced by its proximity now, that made Imani's breath catch with something between concern and primal warning. "I need a doctor." His voice was low, controlled despite obvious pain, the kind of voice that didn't ask. It simply stated facts and expected the world to adjust accordingly. Imani stood before she could think better of it, her 17 hours of exhaustion evaporating in the face of professional instinct.
"I'm Dr. Clark."
"Come with me." Hey, before we dive into what happens next, if you're hooked on this story, do me a favor and subscribe. We drop new stories like this every week, and honestly, this one's just getting good. And you won't want to miss what's coming. Now, let's get into the story. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Marcus Kane, a man who had ended lives with cold precision, who had trained himself to feel nothing, experienced something he hadn't felt in 15 years. Not fear of dying, though the collapsed lung was making each breath a knife fight, but fear of the woman with warm brown eyes and steady hands who looked at him like he was a patient who needed saving, not a monster who deserved to bleed out in the street. The harsh fluorescent lights of St. Augustine Medical Center's emergency room created their usual 3 a.m. atmosphere of controlled chaos. Monitors beeping their irregular rhythms, the shuffle of tired feet on linoleum, murmured conversations between nurses coordinating care. Dr. Imani Clark had been on her feet for 17 hours straight, her scrubs wrinkled, her natural curls pulled back into a bun that had given up any pretense of order around hour 12. She'd been finishing sutures on a teenager's skateboarding mishap when the atmosphere in the ER shifted. It was subtle at first, a change in air pressure, the way a room feels just before a thunderstorm. The security guard near the entrance straightened almost imperceptibly. Janet, the charge nurse who'd worked ER for 23 years and claimed nothing surprised her anymore, glanced toward the automatic doors with the wariness of someone recognizing predator energy. Then Imani saw him. Marcus Kane was not a man who blended into crowds. At 34, he had the kind of face that spoke of hard experience, sharp jaw, high cheekbones, and eyes that seemed to calculate threat assessments and exit strategies in the same heartbeat. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, unusual for someone whose clothing suggested meticulous attention to detail. The black shirt was expensive, tailored, now ruined by blood spreading from a wound he covered with one hand. Dark jeans, boots built for function rather than fashion. No jewelry except a watch that looked tactical rather than decorative. But it wasn't his appearance that commanded attention. It was the way he moved, economical, precise, like violence compressed into human form and temporarily leashed. And right now, that careful control was fraying at the edges. His breathing was labored, each inhale shallow and painful. His free hand steadied himself against the doorframe for just a moment before he pushed forward. "I need a doctor." The words came out tight, clipped by pain he was clearly accustomed to managing. The ER went still. Janet took an unconscious step backward. The security guard's hand drifted toward his radio. Everyone recognized danger when it walked through their doors, even danger that was bleeding. Imani didn't step back. She was too exhausted for the luxury of fear, too focused on the way his skin had gone ashen under the harsh lights, the slight tremor in his shoulders that suggested shock setting in, the concerning wet sound accompanying his breathing that screamed pneumothorax to her trained ears.
"I'm Dr. Clark."
She was already moving forward, already pulling on fresh gloves, her mind shifting into the clinical focus that had carried her through medical school, residency, and 3 years of ER rotations. What happened? How long ago were you injured? Marcus's eyes locked onto hers, and something flickered across his features. Surprise, maybe. Surprise that she'd approached when others retreated. Surprise that her voice held concern rather than judgment. Surprise that she looked at him and seemed to see a patient in crisis rather than whatever his appearance suggested. Bullet graze. 3 hours ago. Something's wrong with my breathing. Each sentence cost him effort. His jaw was tight, muscles working to keep his expression neutral despite obvious pain. Imani's clinical assessment was instantaneous. Gunshot wound, respiratory distress, likely pneumothorax, possible hemothorax, definite shock. Okay, we need to get you into trauma bay too. Can you walk? Yes. Then let's move. Janet, I need a chest tube kit, O-negative blood on standby, and call respiratory therapy. Possible pneumothorax with hemothorax. She was already guiding him toward the trauma bay, one hand hovering near his elbow without quite touching, ready to catch him if he faltered. Marcus moved with her, each step measured and deliberate. You're not going to call the police. It wasn't a question. It was a statement that acknowledged what they both knew. Bullet wounds required police reports, questions, investigations. Imani met his eyes again as they entered the trauma bay, seeing past the cold control to the calculation happening behind his gaze. He was weighing whether she was a threat, whether he needed to leave despite his injury, whether saving his life was worth whatever complications came next. I'm going to save your life, she said simply, helping him onto the gurney. That's what I do. Everything else is later. Lie back. For a man who had spent 15 years trusting no one, who had learned that survival meant constant vigilance and emotional detachment, Marcus Kane did something that surprised even himself. He lay back and let the woman with warm brown eyes and steady hands try to save him. As Imani worked, cutting away his shirt, exposing the bullet graze across his ribs and the concerning asymmetry of his chest wall, calling out orders for equipment and medication, Marcus watched her with something approaching wonder. She didn't flinch at the scars crisscrossing his torso, didn't ask questions about the prison tattoo on his shoulder or the knife marks that spoke of close-quarters combat. She just worked with focused efficiency, her hands confident and sure, her voice calm as she explained what she was doing. This is going to hurt, but I need to decompress your lung. The bullet likely caused air to leak into your chest cavity. I'm going to insert a needle here. She palpated his ribs, finding the landmark. To release the pressure, then we'll place a chest tube for drainage. I'm administering local anesthetic, but you'll still feel pressure and pain. Do it.
She did.
And as the needle pierced between his ribs and his breathing suddenly eased, as the terrible pressure in his chest released and air rushed back into his collapsed lung, Marcus Kane stared at the ceiling tiles of St. Augustine Medical Center and thought about the strange twist of fate that had led him here. He'd come expecting mechanical treatment at best, police intervention at worst. What he got was a doctor with gentle hands and fierce eyes who looked at him like he was worth saving, even when everything about him screamed danger. And for a man who had spent his entire adult life dealing in death, being looked at like he was worth saving felt more dangerous than any bullet wound. This version models the competitor's narrative flow, opening with a dramatic entrance, establishing both characters through action and observation, building tension through environmental details, and ending with an emotional revelation, while telling your unique story of Marcus and Imani. The chest tube insertion was textbook perfect, but Imani's hands trembled as she secured the sutures. She'd done this procedure dozens of times, first on simulation mannequins, then under supervision, finally on her own during her trauma surgery fellowship. But those patients hadn't watched her with eyes like broken glass, hadn't carried the evidence of violence written across their skin in scars and ink, hadn't made her hyper-aware that one wrong move could mean the difference between saving a life and losing it. Tube is placed and draining, she said aloud, more for herself than for Marcus or Janet, who was monitoring vitals with the focused intensity of a veteran nurse who'd seen everything twice. Output looks good. Lung re-expansion should be immediate. She glanced at the monitor. His oxygen saturation was climbing, 89, 92, 95. The tight band around her chest loosened slightly. Marcus's eyes hadn't left her face. Even through the pain medication she'd administered, even with shock still graying his features, he watched her with an attention that felt almost predatory. Not threatening exactly. More like he was cataloging every detail, filing her away in some internal database for reasons she couldn't fathom and wasn't sure she wanted to understand. The bullet graze needs cleaning and suturing, she continued, shifting her focus to his ribs where the wound tracked across his side. Ugly but superficial, missing anything vital by inches that felt like divine intervention. I'm going to irrigate it first, debride any contaminated tissue. You'll need antibiotics, probably a tetanus booster, depending on when you last had one. Do what you need to do. His voice was stronger now that he could breathe properly, but still tight with controlled pain. Imani set to work, her hands steadying as muscle memory took over. Irrigate, assess, debride, suture. She'd done this hundreds of times. The wound was clean despite the hours that had passed. He'd clearly applied pressure, minimized contamination. Someone had taught him field medicine, or he'd learned through necessity. She didn't ask which. You're lucky, she said, placing the first suture with precision. Another inch medial, and this would have hit your liver. Another inch superior, and we'd be talking about fractured ribs, possible cardiac involvement. She tied off the stitch, reached for another. As it is, you're looking at 2 weeks of restricted movement, antibiotics, wound care, and follow-up to ensure no infection.
I heal fast.
Everyone thinks they heal fast until they end up back in my ER with sepsis. She glanced up, found him almost smiling, a ghost of expression that disappeared as quickly as it appeared. I'm serious. This needs proper care. I'll manage. They fell into silence broken only by the beep of monitors, the wet sound of irrigation, the soft snick of scissors cutting suture thread. Janet moved around them efficiently, adjusting 4 flow rates, documenting vitals, pretending not to listen to every word while definitely listening to every word. Imani could feel her judgment, her concern, her unspoken questions about why Dr. Clark wasn't following protocol, wasn't calling this in, wasn't treating this obvious gunshot wound with the wariness it deserved. But Imani couldn't explain why she wasn't afraid. She should be. This man radiated danger the way other people radiated warmth. Everything about him screamed organized crime, violence, the kind of life that ended with bodies in morgues and grieving families in hospital waiting rooms. Yet when she looked at him, she saw someone in pain who'd trusted her enough to let her help. Someone who'd come to a hospital instead of bleeding out in an alley because some part of him wanted to live. You're going to be fine, she said quietly, tying off the final suture. 23 stitches in a neat line across his ribs, her best cosmetic work because she couldn't help herself. The lung should fully re-expand within 24 hours. Keep the chest tube in for at least 48. Come back if you develop fever, increased pain, shortness of breath, or if the wound shows signs of infection. Marcus's eyes met hers. You know I'm not coming back. I know. She stripped off her gloves, made notes in his chart under a name she suspected was false. Michael Kelly, no known address, no insurance, no emergency contact. But I'm telling you anyway because it's my job to tell you. The sedation finally pulled him under around 4:30 a.m., his body surrendering to exhaustion and medication despite his obvious resistance to letting his guard down. Imani sat in the chair beside his gurney longer than she needed to, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest, the way sleep softened the hard edges of his face into something almost peaceful. She told herself she was monitoring for complications. She didn't examine why that felt like a lie. When dawn broke through the windows of the recovery bay, Marcus woke to find her still there, a cup of water in one hand and pain medication in the other. His eyes found hers immediately, that same calculating assessment, but something in his expression had shifted. Wariness remained, but the knife edge of potential violence had dulled. I didn't call the police, Imani said quietly before he could ask. Whatever you're involved in, you came here for help. That's what I do. That's all I do. Marcus sat up slowly, testing his breathing, his mobility. The chest tube pulled, but held. Why? Because everyone deserves medical care. No exceptions. She handed him the water, the pills. Take these. You're being discharged against medical advice, because I know you're leaving whether I recommend it or not. But take the antibiotics I'm prescribing, keep the wound clean, and for God's sake, if you develop complications, come back. He took the medication, drank the water, his eyes never leaving her face. When he stood, moving with the careful precision of someone accustomed to working through pain, he paused at the door. His gaze dropped to her name badge, Dr. I. Clark, Trauma Surgery, lingered there for a moment that felt weighted with significance. Thank you. The words came out rough, unpracticed, like he didn't say them often. You're welcome. Then he was gone, disappearing into the early morning light streaming through the ER entrance, leaving nothing behind but bloodied gauze, a false name in her charts, and questions Imani told herself she didn't want answered. She went back to work, 6 more hours of her shift remaining, other patients needing care, the normal chaos of emergency medicine. She told herself she'd forget him by afternoon, by evening at the latest. But when she finally made it home 18 hours later, collapsing into her apartment with exhaustion singing in her bones, she realized she could still see his eyes, winter frost and broken glass, and something that had looked almost like hope when she told him he was going to be fine. She told herself it didn't matter. She told herself he was just another patient in an endless stream of broken people she tried to put back together. She knew she was lying. 3 weeks after Marcus Kane disappeared into the dawn, Imani found a perfect cappuccino waiting at the nurse's station during her Thursday night shift. Extra foam, light on the syrup, exactly how she made it at home when she had the energy to bother with her temperamental espresso machine. Anyone know where this came from? She asked, lifting the cup with the logo of an upscale coffee shop 15 blocks away, the kind of place that didn't deliver to hospitals at 2 in the morning. Janet shrugged without looking up from her charting. Showed up about 10 minutes ago. Guy in a black jacket. Didn't say anything, just left it with your name on it. Imani turned the cup, found her name written in neat block letters on the side. Not Dr. Clark or Dr. I. Clark. Just Imani. She told herself it was a coincidence, a grateful former patient, maybe someone she'd treated weeks ago finally thinking to say thank you. She definitely didn't think about winter eyes and controlled violence, and a man who'd watched her like she was the first interesting thing he'd seen in years. She drank the coffee anyway. It was perfect. The cappuccinos kept appearing Thursday night, Saturday night, Tuesday night. Always during her late shifts, always perfect, always with her name in the same neat handwriting. On Friday, an anonymous donation of $50,000 appeared in the South End Free Clinic's account with a note that simply said, "For the people you save who can't pay." The clinic director, Rosa, called her 3 times to ask if she knew who might have that kind of money and that kind of interest in their work. Imani didn't know. Except she did, in the way you know things without evidence, in the way your body recognizes danger before your brain catches up. She felt watched during her walks to the parking garage, felt the weight of attention like a physical touch. Twice she spun around in the hospital corridor, certain someone was behind her. No one was ever there. You're losing it, she told herself at 3 a.m. on a Sunday, finishing her weekend clinic shift with exhaustion making her eyes feel like sandpaper. You're working 70-hour weeks and seeing phantoms. Get some sleep. But sleep didn't come easily anymore. She lay awake in her studio apartment, listening to the city sounds filtering through thin walls, thinking about a man who'd bled in her ER and disappeared like smoke. Thinking about the way he'd said, "Thank you," like the words cost him something. Thinking about eyes like winter and the violence written across his skin in scars. The parking garage at St. Augustine Medical Center was 4 levels of concrete and shadows, perpetually underlit despite maintenance requests that went back years. Imani had learned to be vigilant, keys between her fingers, phone in hand, awareness of every sound and movement. At 2:17 a.m. on a Wednesday, finishing another crushing shift, she was too tired for proper vigilance, but too stubborn to ask security for an escort. Her car was on level 3, tucked into the back corner, where she'd found a spot that morning in the chaos of shift change. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting everything in sickly yellow. Her footsteps echoed on concrete. Somewhere above, a car engine started, headlights sweeping across support pillars. She saw him before she reached her car. Marcus leaned against a black sedan parked 2 spaces from her ancient Honda, arms crossed, utterly still in the way predators are still before they move. He wore dark jeans and a leather jacket, his face half-shadowed but unmistakable. The chest tube was gone, obviously. 3 weeks was enough time to heal from a pneumothorax if you followed medical advice, which she somehow doubted he had. Imani stopped walking. Her heart kicked against her ribs, but not with fear. With something more complicated, recognition, maybe. Certainty. The feeling of a question finally being answered. You've been following me. It wasn't a question. Marcus didn't pretend otherwise. Yes.
The coffee.
The donation. She moved closer, watching his eyes track her movement. That was you. Yes. How long have you been watching me? 3 weeks. He said it without shame, without apology. Just stated it as fact. Since I left the hospital. Imani should run. Should scream for security. Should get in her car and drive away and never look back. Should recognize that a man who stalked her in parking garages, who watched from shadows, who admitted to surveillance without remorse, was dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with bullet wounds and everything to do with the kind of person who thought following someone for 3 weeks was acceptable behavior. Instead, she asked, why? The question hung between them in the flickering fluorescent light. Marcus was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, almost reluctant. Because you saved my life without judging what I am. What are you? You know what I am. He pushed off the car, didn't move closer, but somehow his presence filled more space. You knew when I walked into your ER. You saw the scars, the tattoos, the bullet wound. You're not naive, Dr. Clark.
Imani.
The correction came automatically. If you're going to stalk me, at least use my first name. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe amusement.
Imani.
So tell me. She crossed her arms, mirroring his posture. What exactly am I supposed to know? Marcus studied her for another long moment. She could see him calculating, weighing how much truth to offer, deciding whether honesty or evasion served him better. Finally, he said, I hurt people for money. I've done it since I was 19. I'm very good at it. The words should terrify her. They didn't. Maybe because she'd suspected, maybe because seeing him here, admitting what he was without pretense, felt more honest than any lie could have been. Maybe because exhaustion had stripped away her ability to be appropriately afraid. Contract killer, she said, testing the words. Yes. And the coffee? The donation? Following me around like some kind of, she waved her hand, searching for the right word. Guardian angel with questionable methods? Making sure you're safe. From what? From anything. He said it simply like it was obvious. From anyone. You helped me when you didn't have to. You could have called the police, reported the gunshot wound, let me bleed out while following protocol. You didn't. So, you're stalking me out of gratitude? I'm protecting you out of gratitude. The distinction seemed important to him. There's a difference. Imani laughed, surprising herself. It came out slightly unhinged, edged with exhaustion, and the surreal absurdity of having this conversation in a parking garage at 2 a.m. with a man who just admitted to killing people for a living. This is insane. You know that, right? This entire situation is completely insane. I know. I should call the police. You should. I should get in my car and never come back to this hospital. You won't. He said it with certainty, watching her with those winter eyes that missed nothing. You care too much about your patients. About the clinic. You won't run. He was right, and they both knew it. Imani took a breath, let it out slowly, made a decision that was probably the worst one of her life. What are you, exactly? Beyond the contract killer part. Who is Marcus Kane? You want the truth? I want the truth. He smiled then, brief and bitter. I don't think you do. I don't think anyone really does. Try me. Marcus's car was a study in contradictions. Expensive but nondescript, black sedan that could blend into any street, interior meticulously clean except for an empty coffee cup in the holder and a book wedged between the seats. Imani caught the title as she slid into the passenger seat. Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. A contract killer reading Stoic philosophy felt like the kind of detail her exhausted brain couldn't properly process. Gas station coffee or silence? Marcus asked, key in ignition but not turning it.
Coffee.
Imani surprised herself. Definitely coffee. They drove in silence to a 24-hour convenience store 3 blocks away, the kind of place with flickering neon and bulletproof glass between customers and cashiers. Marcus went inside while Imani sat in the car, watching the empty street, questioning every decision that had led to this moment. She could still leave. Could call a rideshare, go home, pretend this never happened. Could treat Marcus Kane like the threat he obviously was instead of the puzzle she desperately wanted to solve. He came back with 2 large coffees, surprisingly good creamer, and a box of donuts that looked like they'd been made sometime in the previous century. Breakfast, he said, deadpan. You're going to kill me with gas station pastries instead of whatever it is you usually kill people with? I don't kill people with pastries. He pulled back onto the empty street, drove aimlessly through the city. Too inefficient. The laugh escaped before Imani could stop it, shocked and slightly horrified at herself for finding humor in any of this. Marcus's mouth quirked, not quite a smile, but close enough to suggest he'd been aiming for the reaction. They ended up parked overlooking the river as the city's skyline caught the first hints of dawn. Marcus handed her coffee, took his own, and said, You wanted the truth. Where do you want me to start? The beginning. So he told her. His voice was flat, emotionless, reciting facts like reading from a case file. 16 years old, juvenile detention for assault, no family, no prospects, no future worth mentioning. Victor Chen had come looking for potential, found Marcus, and offered him a choice that wasn't really a choice. Work for the organization or rot in the system until he aged out with nothing.
Marcus chose survival.
They trained him, honed him, turned his anger and his aptitude for violence into something profitable. First kill was 3 weeks after my 19th birthday, Marcus said, staring at his coffee instead of at her. Drug dealer who'd stolen from the organization. Victor said it was a test. I passed. How many? Imani asked quietly. 26 confirmed. Maybe more. I stopped counting after 30 because the numbers stopped matching. He said it like he was reporting the weather. You want details? Methods? Names?
No.
She couldn't bear the weight of that specificity. I want to know if you want to stop. The question hung between them. Marcus went very still, his hands tightening on the coffee cup until Imani worried it might crack. When he finally looked at her, his expression was raw in a way she hadn't seen before, all the careful controls stripped away to reveal something desperate and lost underneath. No one's ever asked me that. I'm asking now. I don't know. The admission seemed to cost him. I don't know if I can. This is what I am, Imani. It's all I've been for 15 years. I don't know how to be anything else. I don't know if there's anything else left in me to be. Imani drank her coffee, watched the sun creep over the horizon, and thought about her brother. Deshaun had been 16 when he died. Wrong place, wrong time. Caught in crossfire between gangs fighting over territory that didn't matter and respect that couldn't be earned with bullets. She'd been 22, first year of medical school, and she'd felt so helpless. All her studying, all her knowledge, and she couldn't save her own brother bleeding out on pavement while she waited for ambulances that came too late. My brother was killed when I was 22, she said, not looking at Marcus. Gang violence. He wasn't involved, just walked past the wrong corner at the wrong time. Bullet through his femoral artery. He bled out before the ambulance arrived. She took a breath, let it out slowly. That's why I became a trauma surgeon. I couldn't save Deshaun, but I could save other people's brothers. Other people's sons. I could fight death every single day, and sometimes, not always, but sometimes, I could win. Marcus was quiet. When she finally looked at him, his eyes held something that might have been understanding. I see death every day, Imani continued. I see what bullets do to bodies, what violence does to families. I know it's not simple. I know there are people who deserve what they get and people who don't, and the universe doesn't care about the distinction. She turned in her seat to face him fully. But you came to me for healing, Marcus. Out of every place you could have gone, every option you had, you came to a hospital. You let me save you. Maybe that means something. Or maybe I was just desperate and bleeding. Maybe. She held his gaze. Or maybe some part of you wants to stop. Wants to be something other than a weapon. You've been watching me for 3 weeks, making sure I'm safe, buying me coffee, donating to the clinic. Those aren't the actions of someone who's comfortable with killing. You don't know what you're talking about. But his voice lacked conviction. Then explain it to me. Explain why you're here, Marcus. Explain why you didn't just disappear after I patched you up. Explain the coffee and the money and the stalking that you keep calling protection. He was silent for a long moment, staring out at the river where light caught the water in golden shards. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Because for 3 hours in your ER, someone looked at me like I was worth saving. And I don't know what to do with that. I don't know how to carry it, but I can't let it go. Imani's chest tightened. She reached across the console, placed her hand over his where it rested on the gear shift. His skin was warm, his fingers scarred in ways that told stories she didn't need to hear. You don't have to have all the answers right now. You don't have to know how to stop or what comes next. But you have to want it, Marcus. You have to choose yourself, choose something different. And if I can't, if I'm too broken for different, then we figure that out when we get there. She squeezed his hand gently. But you're not alone in figuring it out. Not anymore. They sat in silence as the sun climbed higher, painting the city in shades of amber and gold. Marcus didn't pull his hand away. Imani didn't let go. Somewhere in the distance, the city woke up. Traffic sounds, construction noise, the ordinary chaos of people living ordinary lives. Neither of them felt ordinary anymore. Finally, Marcus started the car. I should get you home. You've been awake for, what, 24 hours? 26, but who's counting? Imani smiled tiredly. Home sounds good. He drove carefully through morning traffic, following her directions to her apartment building in a neighborhood that had seen better decades. When he pulled up to the curb, she didn't immediately get out. Marcus? Thank you for the truth. You might regret asking for it. Maybe. But I don't think so. She opened the door, paused. Same time next week? More terrible gas station coffee and existential conversations about violence and redemption. He almost smiled. You're insane. Probably. Is that a yes? It's a yes. She watched him drive away as dawn broke fully over the city, light chasing shadows into corners where they couldn't hide. Something had shifted between them in those hours. Some understanding reached, some connection forged in honesty and exhaustion, and the strange intimacy of shared broken things. Imani went inside, collapsed into bed still wearing her scrubs, and slept dreamlessly for the first time in 3 weeks. The pattern established itself without discussion or formal agreement. Marcus would appear in the hospital parking garage around 2 a.m., leaning against his car or sitting on the concrete barrier, waiting. Imani would finish her shift, find him there, and they'd drive somewhere, all-night diners, empty overlooks, once to a 24-hour laundromat where they sat among the humid warmth of industrial dryers and talked until her phone alarm reminded her she had the clinic in 4 hours. You don't have to keep doing this, Imani said on their 5th meeting, sliding into his passenger seat with coffee he'd brought from the good place 15 blocks away. I'm perfectly capable of getting to my car alone. I know. Marcus pulled out of the garage, drove with the same careful precision. He did everything. But I'm here anyway. By the 3rd week, he had a key to her apartment. Imani didn't remember consciously giving it to him. One night she'd been so exhausted after a 30-hour shift that she'd fumbled with her lock for 5 minutes while Marcus watched with patient concern. The next time she saw him, he had a copy, had let himself in while she slept off the shift, and she'd woken to find him reading in her armchair, his presence somehow making her shabby studio feel safer than any deadbolt. This is weird, right? She asked, padding to her kitchen in scrubs and mismatched socks, going straight for the coffee pot. This whole situation. We should acknowledge that this is deeply weird. Marcus looked up from his book, a different one now, something about behavioral psychology. It's weird, but you're not leaving.
No.
He watched her pour coffee, add the exact amount of cream she preferred. Are you asking me to? Imani considered the question honestly. A man she barely knew had a key to her apartment, showed up uninvited, sat watch while she slept. By any reasonable standard, she should be terrified. Instead, she slept better knowing he was there.
No.
I'm not asking you to leave. They talked about everything in those stolen hours between her shifts and the dawn. Marcus told her about his childhood in fragments. Absent father, mother who overdosed when he was 12, foster homes that ranged from neglectful to actively harmful. He'd learned early that violence was currency, that being dangerous meant being left alone, that survival required shutting down everything soft until nothing remained but edges. I don't remember what it felt like before, he admitted one night, sitting on her fire escape while she smoked a cigarette she'd bummed off a nurse, a habit she'd quit 2 years ago, but sometimes needed. Before I learned to feel nothing. I was 12 when my mom died, 19 when I killed for the first time. Somewhere between those years, I stopped being a person and became a function. Imani exhaled smoke into the humid night air. You're a person now. I'm looking right at you. You see what you want to see. I see what's there. She stubbed out the cigarette, immediately regretted wasting it. I see someone who reads philosophy and drinks terrible gas station coffee and watches overexhausted doctors like some kind of violent guardian angel. That's a person, Marcus. Complicated and damaged and trying, but still a person. He didn't argue, just sat in silence while the city hummed around them, his presence solid and certain in ways that defied logic. Imani told him about her dreams for the clinic, expansion to 3 locations, mobile units for underserved neighborhoods, partnerships with mental health services, and addiction treatment programs. She talked about Deshawn, about the guilt she still carried, about how saving lives was both penance and purpose. Marcus listened without trying to fix anything, without offering empty platitudes, just absorbed her words and gave them weight through attention. You think healing is redemption, he observed one dawn, watching her make breakfast in her tiny kitchen, eggs and toast, nothing fancy, but made with care. I think healing is defiance, Imani corrected, cracking eggs into a pan. Death comes for everyone. Violence, disease, age, accidents, we're all temporary. But every life I save is me telling death, not today. That matters. And killing is surrender. It's accepting that violence is inevitable, that some people deserve to die, that the world is better with fewer people in it. She plated the eggs, handed him a fork. I don't believe that. I can't believe that, and do what I do. Marcus ate slowly, thinking, what if they do deserve it? Some of the people I've killed. I don't want to know. Imani cut him off gently but firmly. I'm not your confessor, Marcus. I'm not here to absolve you or judge you. I'm just here. The shift in their relationship was gradual, then sudden. 6 weeks after that first parking garage confrontation, Marcus mentioned casually that he hadn't taken a contract in 8 weeks, the longest break since he was 19. Imani had looked up from her clinical notes, met his eyes, and seen something there that made her breath catch. Not the winter frost she'd first seen, but something warmer, more uncertain. Something that looked almost like hope. 8 weeks, she repeated. That's significant. Victor's getting impatient. Keeps calling with jobs. I keep not answering. What happens when you don't answer? Eventually, he stops asking and starts demanding. Marcus's jaw tightened. But I can't take another one. I keep thinking about you, about the clinic, about becoming something other than a weapon. And I can't reconcile that with putting a bullet in someone's head for money. Imani reached across her kitchen table, took his hand. Then don't reconcile it. Choose differently. It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. It's just not easy. Their first kiss happened 3 nights later, in her kitchen at dawn after she'd worked a shift that included 2 GSWs, a stabbing, and a car accident with 3 pediatric casualties. She'd come home shaking, the weight of the night pressing down until she could barely breathe. Marcus had been there, waiting, and when she walked through her door, he'd simply opened his arms. She'd gone to him without thinking, buried her face against his chest, and let herself break a little. When she finally pulled back, his hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. Their eyes met, and Imani saw all of him. The killer, the damaged boy, the man trying desperately to become someone new. She saw the scars and the violence and the 15 years of numbness, and underneath it all she saw someone worth saving. She kissed him. Or he kissed her. Later, she wouldn't remember who moved first, only that his lips were soft and his touch was gentle and he tasted like coffee and something that might have been hope. "I've killed 26 people," he whispered against her mouth, giving her one last chance to run. "I know." Imani kissed him again, deeper this time, deliberate and certain. "I'm choosing you anyway." His arms tightened around her, careful despite their strength, and for the first time in 15 years Marcus, Kane let himself want something more than numbness. Let himself believe that maybe, possibly, he could be more than the sum of his violence. Outside, the sun rose over a city that didn't care about their impossible connection. Inside, in a shabby studio apartment with thin walls and a temperamental heater, 2 broken people chose each other despite every reason they shouldn't. It felt like the most dangerous thing either of them had ever done. It felt like the beginning of something neither of them knew how to name, but both desperately needed. Victor Chen's first call came on a Tuesday. Marcus let it go to voicemail, listened to the message with growing tension coiling in his chest. "Marcus, it's been 9 weeks. I have a job that requires your particular expertise. Call me back within 24 hours. The tone was pleasant, conversational, with an undercurrent of steel that Marcus recognized immediately. This wasn't a request. He deleted the message and didn't call back. The second call came 3 days later, less pleasant. "You're making me look bad, Marcus. When I tell people my best asset is available, I expect him to be available.
Call me.
Today." Marcus blocked the number. Victor would have others. The third call came from a number Marcus didn't recognize. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Victor's voice was cold now, stripped of pretense. "Ignoring me is a mistake. You know what happens to people who make mistakes in this business. Whatever you're doing, whoever you're doing it with, it's not worth what comes next. Take the job I'm sending you, or I'll take it personally." Marcus hung up and felt the first real spike of fear he'd experienced in years. Not for himself. He'd long since made peace with the idea that his life would end violently and probably soon. But Imani. If Victor started looking into why his most reliable killer had suddenly developed a conscience, he'd find her. And once he found her, she became leverage. He noticed the surveillance on day 4. A gray Nissan parked across from the hospital, same car there 3 shifts in a row with different drivers. Unfamiliar faces in the South End Clinic's waiting room. 2 well-dressed, 2 alert, watching Imani with professional assessment rather than patient desperation. Marcus recognized the pattern because he'd run this kind of operation dozens of times. Victor was gathering intelligence, building a profile, learning everything about Imani Clark, so he'd know exactly how to use her. Marcus waited until Imani finished her clinic shift, followed her home, and told her everything the moment she walked through her apartment door. "You need to leave town. Tonight. I'll give you money, help you relocate somewhere Victor can't find you. Just for a few weeks until I can."
No.
Imani dropped her bag on the kitchen counter, faced him with the same stubborn determination he'd seen when she'd saved his life. "Absolutely not. Imani, you don't understand what he's capable of." "I understand perfectly. He's your former employer who wants you back, and he's willing to threaten me to make that happen. I get it, Marcus. But I'm not running." She moved past him to the sink, started washing her hands with the methodical precision she brought to everything medical. "I have patients who depend on me. The clinic serves 200 people a week who have nowhere else to go. I'm not abandoning them because your past is catching up to you. Your safety is more important than... Don't. She spun to face him, water dripping from her hands. Don't you dare tell me what's more important.
You don't get to make that call.
My safety, my choice, my risk to take. This isn't a theoretical risk. Victor doesn't make idle threats. If he's decided to use you as leverage, he will take you. And when he does, Marcus's voice cracked despite his best efforts at control. Imani, when he does, there are things he'll do to make me comply that you can't imagine. Things I've seen him do to other people. I can't, he stopped, forced himself to breathe. I can't let that happen to you. Imani dried her hands slowly, her expression softening slightly. You think leaving town keeps me safe? He already knows who I am, where I work, probably where I live. Running just means I'm alone when he finds me. At least here I have you. At least here we can figure this out together. There's nothing to figure out. I take whatever job he wants, prove I'm still reliable, and eventually he loses interest in you. And you go back to killing people? Her eyes searched his face. After 2 months of not killing people? After learning what it feels like to choose something different? You'd throw that away. To keep you safe?
Yes.
Without hesitation. They stared at each other across her tiny kitchen, the argument hanging between them like something physical and sharp. Imani spoke first, her voice quieter now but no less firm. I appreciate that you want to protect me. I do. But I'm not a damsel who needs rescuing, Marcus. I'm a trauma surgeon who's dealt with gang members, domestic abusers, and patients who've threatened to kill me because I wouldn't prescribe opioids. I'm not helpless. I know you're not helpless. But Victor Chen isn't a drunk patient making threats. Marcus struggled for words that could convey the reality without terrifying her. He's efficient. Clinical. He views human life as a resource to be managed or eliminated based on utility. You're useful to him only as leverage against me. Once you've served that purpose, then we make sure I never serve that purpose. Imani crossed her arms. We're careful. We're smart. We figure out how to handle this without you going back to being his weapon, and without me running away from my life. There has to be a third option. There wasn't a third option. Marcus knew this, with the certainty of someone who'd lived in Victor's world for 15 years. But he also knew that look on Imani's face, the same stubborn determination that had made her save his life without calling the cops, that made her work 70-hour weeks at the hospital plus weekends at the free clinic, that made her believe everyone deserved healing. She wouldn't run, and he couldn't force her. At least let me increase security, he said finally. I'll drive you to and from work. You don't go anywhere alone. You vary your routine. And if you see anything suspicious, anything at all, you call me immediately.
Deal.
She moved closer, took his hands. We'll be careful. It'll be okay. Marcus wanted to believe her. Wanted to trust that caution and vigilance would be enough. But he'd seen too much, knew too well how Victor operated. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. That night, Imani worked her regular clinic shift while Marcus watched from his car across the street, cataloging every person who entered, every vehicle that passed, every shadow that moved wrong. She finished at 11 p.m., later than usual because a patient had come in with a diabetic emergency. Marcus watched her lock the clinic door, start toward her car in the small parking lot behind the building. He saw the gray Nissan before she did. Saw it pull into the lot, blocking her path. Saw 2 men exit with practiced efficiency. Marcus was already moving, already pulling his gun from the console, already running across the street with the kind of speed that came from 15 years of violence. But he was too far away, too slow, too late. Imani saw them coming, dropped into a defensive stance he had known she knew, hands up, weight balanced, ready to fight. She got one good hit in, elbow to the first man's throat that made him stagger. But the second man was already behind her, arm around her throat, pressure point applied with professional precision. She fought for maybe 10 seconds before her body went limp. Marcus reached the parking lot as they were loading her into the Nissan. He aimed, had a clean shot at the driver, could have taken them both down and extracted Imani. but his phone buzzed with a message that made his blood turn to ice. Follow and she dies. Come alone to the address I'm sending. You have 1 hour. The Nissan pulled away. Marcus stood in the empty parking lot, guns still raised, watching the taillights disappear. Every instinct screamed at him to follow, to hunt, to kill everyone involved and get her back. But Victor had chosen his leverage well. Marcus had spent 15 years learning to feel nothing, learning to calculate odds and make rational decisions based on utility rather than emotion. For the first time in 15 years, rational calculation wasn't possible. Because the woman he'd somehow learned to love was in Victor Chen's hands, and there was nothing Marcus could do except follow instructions and hope Victor wanted to negotiate rather than punish. His phone buzzed again. An address on the industrial waterfront. Below it, a photo of Imani unconscious in a chair, Victor Chen sitting across from her, smiling at the camera. The message read, "Let's discuss your employment status." Marcus got in his car and drove toward the waterfront, toward whatever fresh hell Victor had planned, toward the woman who'd made him want to be something other than a weapon. And he accepted, with cold certainty, that before this night ended, he'd probably have to become that weapon one more time. The warehouse was exactly what Marcus expected. Industrial waterfront, abandoned for years. Perfect isolation for the kind of conversation Victor wanted to have. Marcus parked where instructed, checked his weapon, and walked through the rusted entrance with his hands visible and empty. He'd left his gun in the car. Victor's men would search him anyway, and arriving armed would only escalate before Marcus was ready. 2 guards met him inside, patted him down with professional thoroughness, confiscated his phone, and the backup knife he'd deliberately left obvious in his boot. They missed the razor blade sewn into his belt and the handcuff key tucked behind his watch face.
Sloppy.
Victor was getting overconfident. They led him through the warehouse to a cleared space lit by industrial work lights. Victor Chen sat in a leather office chair that looked absurd in the concrete and rust environment, perfectly composed in an expensive suit. Across from him, Imani was zip-tied to a metal folding chair, conscious now but groggy. Her eyes found Marcus immediately, wide with fear but also something else. Trust, maybe, or hope that he had a plan. He didn't. Not yet. But he was counting, for guards total including the 2 who'd searched him, positioned at corners with clear lines of fire. 2 exits, the main entrance and a loading bay door to his left. Victor unarmed but confident, sitting just close enough to Imani that any violence would put her at risk. The math wasn't good, but Marcus had worked with worse odds. Marcus. Victor smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. Thank you for being punctual. Please sit. He gestured to another folding chair positioned across from him. Marcus sat, keeping his body language relaxed despite every muscle coiled for violence. Let her go. This is between us. This is very much about her. She's the reason my best asset has been unavailable for 2 months. She's the reason you've been ignoring my calls, declining lucrative opportunities, acting like you have the luxury of choice. Victor leaned forward slightly. You don't have choice, Marcus. You have employment. And right now, I have a job that requires your particular skills.
I'm listening.
Senator James Morrison. He's been investigating my business operations for 6 months, getting uncomfortably close to actionable intelligence. He has a hearing scheduled in 2 weeks that could cause significant problems. I need him to miss that hearing. Permanently. Victor pulled out a tablet, swiped through documents. I have his schedule, security detail rotation, residential layout. The job pays triple your usual rate. Marcus kept his expression neutral, his voice flat. Timeline: 1 week. You'll have full logistical support, clean extraction, the usual arrangements. Victor set down the tablet. Complete this successfully, and Dr. Clark goes home unharmed. Refuse and she dies here. Tonight. And I'll make sure you watch. Imani made a sound, not fear exactly, but something like disbelief. Marcus didn't look at her. Couldn't. If he looked at her, saw the horror or disappointment or betrayal in her eyes, he'd lose the cold focus he needed. I'll need 48 hours for reconnaissance, Marcus said, his voice empty of everything except professional assessment. Full dossier on the security detail, current threat assessment, backup contingencies. Of course. Victor smiled wider. I knew you'd be reasonable. You always were my most reliable asset. That's why this disappoints me, Marcus. All this drama over a woman. I expected better judgment from you. You have my agreement. Let her go. When the job is complete. She's insurance until then. Don't worry, she'll be comfortable. Well-fed, unharmed, just unavailable. Victor stood, gestured to his guards. Let's discuss logistics. The senator's schedule is complex, but I've identified 3 optimal windows. He moved away from Imani, motioning Marcus to follow to a table where documents were spread out. The guards shifted positions, 2 following Victor, 1 staying near Imani, 1 by the entrance. Marcus stood slowly, his mind calculating distances and angles and the precise sequence of movements that would give him the narrow window he needed. Victor was explaining security rotations when Marcus moved. It happened faster than Imani could fully process. One moment Marcus was standing beside Victor, studying documents with that same cold efficiency that had chilled her when he'd agreed to commit murder. The next moment, he was violence incarnate, fluid, precise, terrifyingly competent in ways that made her previous understanding of him seem like a child's drawing compared to a photograph. The guard nearest Victor went down first, Marcus's elbow to his throat followed by a movement that snapped something in the man's neck with an audible crack. He took the guard's gun before the body hit the ground, pivoted, and shot the guard by the entrance, center mass, no hesitation, the suppressor reducing the shot to a sharp cough of sound. The third guard was raising his weapon when Marcus threw a knife, the one from the guard's own belt, with perfect accuracy into the man's shoulder. He went down screaming. The fourth guard, the one near Imani, made the mistake of reaching for her as leverage. Marcus shot him in the knee, precise enough to disable without killing, without risking the bullet passing through to hit Imani. The entire sequence took maybe 7 seconds. Victor Chen, who'd spent 20 years building a reputation for ruthless control, stood frozen as Marcus pressed a gun to his temple and forced him to his knees with cold efficiency. You don't threaten her. Marcus's voice was empty, devoid of the warmth Imani had learned over 2 months of dawn conversations and shared coffee. This was the weapon Victor had created, precise, lethal, utterly, without mercy.
Ever.
You don't look at her. You don't think about her. You forget she exists. Marcus. Victor started. I could kill you. Marcus increased the pressure, forcing Victor's head down. I could end your organization tonight. Kill everyone you care about, burn your empire, and disappear before morning. You know I can.
You trained me to.
Then why don't you? Because it would start a war that would consume her anyway. Because killing you makes me the monster you created instead of the person she believes I can be. Marcus's jaw tightened. But understand this, you touch her, you threaten her, you so much as drive past her apartment, and I forget why I let you live. Clear? Victor, pressed against concrete with a gun to his head and 3 of his men down, managed a tight nod. Marcus stood, keeping the gun trained on Victor, and moved to Imani. He cut her zip ties with the wounded guard's knife, his hands gentle despite the violence still crackling around him like electricity. Can you walk? Imani couldn't speak, could barely breathe. She'd known intellectually what Marcus was, what he'd done, but seeing it, watching him move with that terrible efficiency, watching him kill and maim with the same precision she used to save lives, made it real in ways that statistics couldn't. She nodded numbly. Then we're leaving. Stay behind me. Marcus kept the gun on Victor as they backed toward the exit. To Victor, he said, you have until morning to clear your surveillance from the hospital and the clinic. If I see your people near her, our agreement ends. And Victor, I'm keeping the gun. Consider it severance pay. They made it to Marcus's car before Imani's legs gave out. She collapsed against the passenger door, shaking violently, her mind replaying those 7 seconds of violence on an endless loop. The guard's neck snapping, the precise shot, the knife throw, the the cold efficiency in Marcus's eyes when he'd pressed the gun to Victor's temple. Marcus opened the door, helped her inside with the same gentle care he always showed her, the contrast making her want to scream or laugh or cry. Maybe all three. Imani, drive. Her voice came out hoarse.
Just drive.
Get us away from here. He drove. They made it 3 blocks before Imani realized she was crying, silent tears streaming down her face, while her hands shook so badly she had to clasp them together to make them stop. Marcus didn't try to comfort her, didn't apologize or explain. Just drove through the empty city streets while the woman he loved processed exactly what and who he was. When they finally reached her apartment, he parked but didn't turn off the engine. I'll leave if you want. I understand if you can't, if seeing that changes. I need time. Imani's voice was barely a whisper. I need to think. Alone. Marcus nodded, his expression carefully blank in that way she now recognized as him feeling too much and showing nothing. Okay. She got out of the car, walked to her building on unsteady legs, and didn't look back. Behind her, she heard Marcus's car idle for a long moment before driving away into the night. Inside her apartment, Imani locked the door, slid down to sit on the floor, and finally let herself break. Imani went to work the next day because she didn't know what else to do. Showered, dressed in clean scrubs, drove to St. Augustine Medical Center on autopilot while her mind replayed those 7 seconds in the warehouse on endless loop. The crack of the guard's neck. The precision of Marcus's movements. The empty coldness in his eyes when he'd pressed the gun to Victor's temple. She saved 3 lives that shift. A motorcycle accident with internal bleeding, a construction worker with a punctured lung, a teenager overdosing on fentanyl. She worked with the same focused efficiency she always brought to surgery, her hands steady even while her mind fractured into pieces she didn't know how to reassemble. Janet watched her with concern during shift change. You okay, Dr. Clark? You seem off.
Fine.
Just tired. The lie came easily. Everything came easily when you moved through the world like you were watching yourself from outside your body. She made it home around 7 p.m., unlocked her apartment door, set down her bag, and fell apart. The crying started first, deep, wrenching sobs that felt like they were tearing something loose inside her chest. Then the shaking, her whole body trembling so violently she had to sit on the floor because standing wasn't possible. She pressed her palms against the hardwood, tried to ground herself, and couldn't stop seeing Marcus's face. The cold efficiency, the complete absence of hesitation, the way he'd killed 1 man and disabled 3 others in the time it took her heart to beat 7 times. She'd known what he was. Had known from the moment he walked into her ER with a bullet wound and eyes like winter. Had known when he told her about 26 confirmed kills, about Victor Chen, about 15 years of violence. But knowing intellectually and witnessing reality were different things. She'd romanticized his past, turned it into something abstract and manageable. A tragic backstory. Circumstances beyond his control. A good man forced into bad situations. Last night had stripped away the romance. Last night had shown her exactly what Marcus Kane was capable of when necessity demanded violence. And the worst part, the part that made her sob harder, was that he'd done it to save her. Had become that cold, efficient weapon because she'd been too stubborn to run when he'd beg her to. Her phone rang around 9 p.m. Maya's face lit up the screen. Imani let it go to voicemail. Maya called again. And again. On the 4th call, Imani finally answered.
I fine.
Liar. I'm coming over. Maya, don't. The line went dead. Maya arrived 20 minutes later with Thai food, wine, and the determined expression of someone who wouldn't be dismissed. She took one look at Imani, still on the floor, eyes swollen, wearing yesterday's scrubs, and set down the food with careful precision. What happened? So Imani told her. Everything. Marcus, the contract killing, the 2 months of coffee and dawn conversations, the warehouse, Victor Chen, the violence. Maya listened without interrupting, her expression cycling through shock, concern, and something that might have been anger. Let me make sure I understand, Maya said when Imani finished. You've been dating a contract killer for 2 months. You knew what he was. And last night you're surprised that he acted like a contract killer? It's not. It's more complicated than, is it? Maya poured wine into 2 mugs because Imani didn't own proper wine glasses. You knew what he was, Imani. Did you think it was theoretical? Did you think contract killer was just an interesting personality quirk? Of course not. Imani took the wine, drank half of it in one swallow. I thought I understood. I thought I'd processed what he'd done, what he was capable of. But seeing it, Maya, watching him kill someone with his bare hands, it was real, Maya finished. It was real instead of a story he told you over coffee. Imani nodded, tears starting again. I'd built this narrative where he was a victim of circumstances, where he was fundamentally good underneath the violence. But last night I saw what he really is. And I don't know how to reconcile the man who reads philosophy in my apartment with the man who snaps someone's neck without hesitation. Can I ask you something? Maya set down her wine. Are you afraid of him? Like, genuinely afraid he might hurt you? Imani considered the question honestly. Remembered Marcus's hands, so gentle when he touched her, so lethal when necessity demanded. Remembered the way he'd cut her zip ties with careful precision, the way he'd helped her to the car, the way he'd driven away when she asked for space.
No.
I'm not afraid of him. Then what are you afraid of? I don't know. But she did know. She was afraid of loving someone capable of that kind of violence. Afraid of what it said about her that she'd watched him kill, and her first concern had been for his safety, not the men he'd hurt. Afraid that choosing Marcus meant choosing a life where violence was always one phone call away. Maya reached over, took Imani's hand. You're allowed to walk away. You know that, right? You're allowed to decide this is too much, too complicated, too dangerous. You're allowed to choose yourself. I know, but you don't want to. I don't know what I want. Imani finished her wine, poured more. I just know I can't stop seeing his face. Both faces. The man I've been falling in love with, and the weapon he becomes when threatened. And I don't know how to hold both of those truths at the same time. They talked until midnight, working through Thai food and wine, and when Maya finally left, Imani felt marginally more stable. Still broken, still confused, but at least functional enough to shower and change into actual pajamas. She didn't hear from Marcus. Not that night, not the next day, not the day after. His absence was conspicuous, a hole in her routine where his presence had become expected. No coffee at the nurse's station. No text checking if she'd gotten home safely. No figure waiting in the parking garage at 2 a.m. By the end of the first week, Imani started to worry. By the end of the second, she was checking her phone obsessively, driving past his apartment, an address he'd given her for emergencies, and finding it dark and empty. By the end of the third week, she accepted what she'd been avoiding. Marcus had disappeared. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, slipped under her apartment door sometime between her leaving for work and coming home. Expensive paper, Marcus's neat handwriting, words that broke something in Imani's chest. Imani, I'm leaving. New city, new identity, new life. Don't try to find me. I've made arrangements to ensure Victor won't bother you again. Let's just say he has bigger problems now than one doctor who knows too much. You deserve someone who doesn't have blood on their hands. Someone who can give you a normal life, safety, peace. Someone whose past doesn't include 26 murders and a skill set built on violence. That's not me. It will never be me, no matter how much I want it to be. Watching you fear me in that warehouse broke something I didn't know could still break. I've spent 15 years becoming a weapon, learning to feel nothing, accepting that I'm fundamentally damaged beyond repair. For 2 months, you made me believe I could be something different. But last night proved I was lying to both of us. When it mattered, when you were threatened, I became exactly what Victor trained me to be. That's who I am underneath everything else. You saved my life twice. Once in your ER, once by making me want to live beyond surviving. I'm returning the favor by removing myself before my world destroys you completely. Thank you for seeing me as human. For those 2 months of coffee and conversation and the possibility of being more than a monster. I'll carry that with me wherever I end up.
Don't look for me. Move on.
Be happy. Save lives. Do all the good in the world that I couldn't. Marcus. Imani read the letter 3 times, then sat on her kitchen floor and cried until her body had nothing left. She cried for Marcus, for herself, for the future they'd almost built, and the impossibility of loving someone so broken. She cried until crying felt pointless, until grief transmuted into something sharper and more focused. Maya found her there an hour later. She'd given her friend a key weeks ago. What happened? Imani handed her the letter. Maya read it, swore creatively, and pulled Imani into a fierce hug. He's an idiot. He's protecting me. He's running away because he's terrified. Maya pulled back, met Imani's eyes. He's not protecting you. He's protecting himself from the possibility that you might actually choose him despite everything. That's scarier than any violence. The words settled into Imani's chest, rearranging her understanding. She thought about Marcus's face when she'd asked for space, that careful blankness masking devastation. Thought about 15 years of learning not to want anything, not to hope, not to believe happiness was possible. Thought about a man so convinced he was irredeemable that the first sign of rejection sent him running. I'm not afraid of Marcus, Imani said slowly, the realization crystallizing. I was shocked, traumatized by witnessing violence. But I was never afraid he'd hurt me. I'm afraid of losing him. Then don't lose him. Maya stood, pulled Imani up. Find him. Tell him he doesn't get to make this decision alone. Tell him you're choosing him anyway, blood and all. He said not to look for him. Since when do you follow instructions? Maya smiled. You're the woman who saved a contract killer's life without calling the cops. Who dated him despite knowing what he was. Who refused to run even when threatened. Don't start being reasonable now. Imani looked at the letter again, at Marcus's careful handwriting trying to be noble while running from the terrifying possibility of being loved despite his darkness. She thought about what she wanted. Really wanted, stripped of fear and shock and the trauma of that night in the warehouse. She wanted Marcus. Broken, violent, trying desperately to be better. She wanted dawn conversations and terrible coffee and the man who read philosophy while she slept. She wanted all of him, even the parts that frightened her, because love wasn't about choosing the easy parts. It was about choosing the whole person and figuring out the rest together. How do I find him? Maya grinned. Now you're talking. Let's start with his apartment. If he's smart enough to disappear, he's smart enough to leave clues for someone stubborn enough to look. Marcus's apartment yielded exactly what Maya predicted. Not obvious clues, but breadcrumbs for someone who knew how to look. A receipt from a storage facility tucked in a book. A motel keycard in the trash with faded printing that Maya held up to the light until the address became visible. A pattern of behavior Imani had learned over 2 months. Marcus didn't actually want to disappear. He wanted someone to care enough to stop him. The Starlight Motel sat on the edge of the city where urban sprawl gave way to industrial wasteland, the kind of place that rented by the hour and didn't ask questions. Room 217 was on the 2nd floor, accessible by external stairs that looked like they might collapse if you breathed on them wrong. Imani climbed them at 7 p.m. on a Thursday, 3 weeks and 2 days after the warehouse, her heart hammering against her ribs with fear and determination in equal measure. She knocked. Waited. Knocked again harder. The door opened. Marcus stood there, and Imani's breath caught at how much 3 weeks had changed him. He'd lost weight, his cheekbones sharp enough to cut, dark circles under his eyes suggesting sleep was theoretical. He wore jeans and a t-shirt, his hair disheveled, and he stared at her with something between hope and devastation. Imani, you are going to leave without saying goodbye. She pushed past him into the room before he could close the door in her face. You were going to write one noble letter and disappear like a coward. The room was sparse. Bed, dresser, television bolted to the wall. A duffel bag sat open on the bed, half packed with clothes. On the dresser, A new passport with Marcus's face and someone else's name, bundled cash, and a Greyhound bus schedule with tomorrow's 6 a.m. departure circled. I was protecting you. Marcus closed the door, leaned against it like he needed the support. From me. From my world. From everything that comes with being near someone like me. Stop. Imani turned to face him fully. Stop protecting me from you. I don't need that. I need you to stop protecting yourself from the possibility of being happy. You saw what I am. His voice was rough, exhausted. In that warehouse. You saw the truth underneath everything else. You were terrified. I was shocked. Traumatized by witnessing violence. There's a difference. Imani moved closer, refusing to let him hide behind distance. I was processing what I'd seen, trying to reconcile the man I'd been falling in love with and the weapon you become when threatened. That's not the same as being afraid of you. You couldn't even look at me in the car. You asked me to leave. Because I needed time to think, to process, to figure out how I felt without you watching me work through it. She stopped an arm's length away. But you didn't give me that time. You decided for both of us that I couldn't handle your reality. You made the choice to run without asking what I wanted. Marcus's jaw tightened. What you want doesn't change what I am. I killed 3 men in front of you. Snapped someone's neck with my bare hands. And the worst part? I didn't hesitate. Didn't feel anything except the need to eliminate threats and get you safe. That's who I am, Imani. That's what 15 years of conditioning created. You deserve someone who doesn't have that inside them. You think I don't know what you are? Imani's voice rose, frustration bleeding through. You think I haven't been completely aware since the moment you walked into my ER? I'm not naive, Marcus. I'm not some innocent who needed protecting from reality. I'm a trauma surgeon who sees violence every single day, who saves gunshot victims and stabbing victims and people who've had terrible things done to them by terrible people. I know exactly what humans are capable of. Then you should know why I need to leave. I know why you want to leave. You're terrified. She moved closer, close enough to see the pain in his eyes, the exhaustion, the fear he was trying to mask. You're terrified of being happy. Terrified that if you let yourself want something good, it'll be taken away. Terrified that you don't deserve redemption or love or any kind of normal life. So you're running before I can reject you, before your past catches up, before the universe punishes you for daring to want something beyond survival. Marcus flinched like she'd struck him. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. You've spent 15 years believing you're irredeemable. Victor told you that, showed you that, built his entire control over you on the idea that you're nothing but a weapon. And some part of you still believes him. Imani reached out, placed her hand over his heart. But I've seen you, Marcus. All of you. The killer and the man reading philosophy. The weapon and the person who brings me coffee and watches over me while I sleep. The violence and the gentleness. I've seen all of it, and I'm not running. You should. His voice cracked. You should run as far and fast as possible.
Why?
Because you killed people to save me? Because you were efficient and brutal and exactly what you needed to be to get us both out alive. She held his gaze. I'm not going to apologize for being glad you're that confident. I'm not going to feel guilty that your violence kept me alive. Yes, it was shocking. Yes, it was traumatic to witness. But I'm not afraid of you, Marcus. I'm afraid of a world where you disappear. Where you keep believing you're nothing but a weapon. Where you never let yourself choose something different. I don't know how to be different. The admission came out barely above a whisper. I don't know how to be anything other than what Victor made me. Then we figure out together. Imani took his hand, felt it trembling. You want to stop killing? Stop. You want to be someone new? Become someone new. You want to believe you deserve happiness? Start believing. None of it happens overnight. None of it is easy. But it starts with choosing Marcus. Choose something different. Choose us. Choose yourself. Something in Marcus broke. She saw it happen. The careful control shattering, the armor cracking, 15 years of emotional numbness giving way to everything he'd been suppressing. His knees buckled and Imani caught him, or they caught each other, sinking to the floor of that terrible motel room in a tangle of limbs and grief. Marcus cried. This lethal, controlled man who'd killed 26 people and learned to feel nothing finally let himself feel everything. He cried for the boy who'd lost his mother at 12, for the teenager recruited from juvie with promises and threats, for 15 years of violence and numbness, and believing he was irredeemable. He cried for the 3 weeks he'd spent preparing to disappear, for the woman he'd tried to leave behind for her own good, for the terrifying possibility that maybe, possibly, he could be more than what Victor had created. Imani held him through all of it, her own tears falling silent and steady. She held him the way she'd wanted someone to hold her when Deshawn died, when she'd felt helpless and broken and unable to fix anything. She held him until the crying subsided into shaking, until the shaking subsided into exhausted stillness. I don't know how, Marcus whispered against her shoulder, his voice wrecked. I don't know how to be someone who deserves you. I don't know how to stop being a weapon. I don't know how to believe I'm worth saving. Then we figure it out together, Imani repeated, pulling back to look at him. That's what healing is, Marcus. It's not about becoming perfect or erasing your past. It's about choosing to carry it differently. About letting someone help you shoulder the weight instead of bearing it alone. What if I can't? What if I'm too broken? Then you're broken and loved anyway. She cupped his face in her hands. I'm not trying to fix you. I'm not trying to absolve you or make your past disappear. I'm just choosing you. All of you. Violence and gentleness. Past and potential future. I'm choosing us figuring this out together, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Marcus stared at her with red-rimmed eyes, this woman who'd saved his life twice and was somehow offering to save it a third time. I love you, he said, the words rough and unpracticed. I didn't think I could. Didn't think I was capable. But I love you, and that terrifies me more than anything Victor could do. Good. Imani smiled through her tears. Love should terrify you. It means you have something to lose. It means you're alive instead of just surviving. She kissed him softly. I love you too. Even when you're being an idiot who tries to leave without saying goodbye. I'm sorry. I know. Don't do it again. I won't. He pulled her closer, held her like she might disappear. What do we do now?
Now.
Imani looked at the bus schedule on the dresser, the fake passport, the half-packed bag. Now we unpack. We go home. We figure out what your life looks like when you're not running. And we do it together. That's simple. That's simple. She kissed him again. And that complicated. But together. They sat on the floor of that motel room until the sun set, holding each other while the city lights came on outside. Tomorrow they'd figure out logistics, therapy, new employment, building a life that didn't involve Victor Chen, or contract killing. Tomorrow they'd start the hard work of redemption and healing, and becoming something new. Tonight, they just held each other, and chose to believe that broken people could build something whole together. 1 year later, Marcus Kane stood in the parking lot of the South End Free Clinic at 11 p.m., watching a man twice his size try to force his way inside to talk to his girlfriend who'd come seeking treatment for injuries they both knew he'd caused. The man was drunk, belligerent, and making threats loud enough to be heard through the reinforced glass doors. Marcus approached with a kind of calm that came from absolute confidence in his ability to handle the situation. You need to leave. The man turned, sized Marcus up, and made the mistake men like him always made, underestimating someone leaner and quieter. Who the fuck are you? Security. You're trespassing. Leave now or I call the police. That's my girl in there. I got a right. You have no rights here. Marcus's voice never rose above conversational. You have 3 seconds to walk away. 1. The man swung. Marcus sidestepped, redirected the momentum, and had him face down on the pavement with one arm locked behind his back in the time it took the man to realize he'd missed. No excessive force. No unnecessary violence. Just precise application of leverage and pressure points that made further aggression impossible. 2. Marcus continued calmly, his knee on the man's back. The 3rd count involves broken bones. Your choice. The man left when Marcus released him, stumbling to his car with muttered threats and wounded pride. Marcus watched him drive away, then returned inside where Rosa, the clinic director, stood with wide eyes. "Remind me never to make you angry," she said. "You'd have to hurt someone I care about first." Marcus smiled slightly, a real smile that still felt strange on his face, but came easier now than it had a year ago. The police have been notified. He won't be back tonight. This was Marcus's life now. Security director for the South End Free Clinic Network, which had expanded to 3 locations thanks to substantial anonymous investments. He protected vulnerable patients, intervened in dangerous situations, ensured the staff could do their work without fear. He used the skills Victor had taught him, but now he protected instead of destroyed. Saved instead of eliminated. Built safety instead of dealing death. It wasn't redemption. He'd learned in therapy that redemption wasn't something you achieved like a goal. It was something you practiced daily. But it was different. It was choosing to be more than a weapon. And most days that was enough. Therapy happened twice a week. Tuesdays and Thursdays at 4 p.m. with Dr. Sarah Chin, who specialized in complex PTSD and trauma. The first 3 months had been brutal, dragging up memories and emotions Marcus had spent 15 years suppressing. He'd nearly quit a dozen times. But Imani had been there for the aftermath, holding him through panic attacks and nightmares, reminding him that healing hurt before it helped. The nightmares were less frequent now. He still woke sometimes with his hands around Imani's throat before his conscious mind recognized where he was, still had flashbacks triggered by unexpected sounds or smells. But Dr. Chun had taught him grounding techniques, coping mechanisms, ways to exist with his past instead of being consumed by it. Imani had been promoted to chief of trauma surgery at St. Augustine's 6 months ago. She still worked crushing hours, still came home exhausted and occasionally covered in other people's blood, still saved lives with the same fierce dedication that had made Marcus believe he was worth saving. But now she came home to someone who understood the weight of taking life or preserving it, who could hold space for her trauma without adding his own, who knew how to be present without trying to fix everything. They'd moved into a small house in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place with a yard and neighbors who waved and asked about your day. Marcus had struggled with the normalcy at first, kept waiting for Victor's people to show up, kept his gun within reach even when logic said it wasn't necessary. But gradually, the house had become home. A place where broken people built something whole together. Victor Chun was in federal prison, serving 15 years for racketeering, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit murder. The anonymous tip containing detailed records of his organization had been delivered to federal prosecutors 11 months ago. Marcus had kept copies of everything from his 15 years working for Victor, insurance he'd never expected to use. Turning state's evidence from anonymity felt like the least he could do. Victor would eventually get out, would possibly come looking for revenge. Marcus accepted this the way he accepted his scars and his nightmares, as permanent features of a past that couldn't be erased. But he'd built something worth protecting now, and he'd do whatever necessary to protect it. At 3:17 a.m., Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Imani. Surgery went well. Heading to car. He drove to St. Augustine Medical Center, parked in the garage on level 3, and waited. Same spot where he'd first revealed himself a year ago. Same waiting, same watching, but now she knew to expect him. Now it was ritual instead of stalking. Imani appeared at 3:30, exhausted but carrying herself with the satisfaction that came from saving a life. She saw Marcus leaning against his car, and her face transformed, tired but genuinely happy, the kind of happiness that came from coming home to someone who understood. Making sure you're safe, Marcus said as she approached, unable to suppress a slight smile. Still dangerous? Imani asked, echoing their first real conversation in this garage a year ago. Only when necessary. That's enough. She took his hand, laced their fingers together. It's always been enough. They walked to the car together, Marcus opening her door with the same careful courtesy he brought to everything now. As he drove through the empty city streets toward home, Imani dozed in the passenger seat, trusting him with her safety in sleep the way she'd trusted him with her heart while awake. Marcus thought about the boy he'd been at 12, at 16, at 19. Thought about the weapon Victor had created and the 26 people he'd killed. Thought about the man he'd been a year ago, preparing to disappear, convinced he was irredeemable, unable to believe happiness was possible. He'd never be free of his past. The violence, the deaths, the 15 years of numbness would always be part of who he was. But Imani had taught him that carrying the past differently meant choosing what you did with it. And he'd chosen to build something new. Protect instead of destroy. Live instead of just survive. Love instead of feel nothing. Was it enough? Could protecting clinic patients balance 26 murders? Could 1 year of therapy erase 15 years of trauma? Could loving one woman redeem a lifetime of violence? Marcus didn't know. Maybe redemption wasn't about balance sheets and moral accounting. Maybe it was about choosing, every single day, to be something more than what you'd been. About letting someone believe you were worth saving until you could believe it yourself. They pulled into their driveway as dawn broke over the city. Imani woke as Marcus turned off the engine, looked at him with sleep-soft eyes, and smiled. Home. Home, Marcus agreed. Together, a killer learning to heal and a healer who'd loved him anyway walked into their house as the sun rose. The future was uncertain, complicated, still shadowed by pasts that couldn't be erased. But they faced it together, broken people who'd built something whole, proving that redemption was possible when someone believed you were worth saving. And Marcus, finally, was learning to believe it himself. Thank you for sticking with this story until the very end. If you enjoyed this journey through moral complexity and difficult choices, subscribe so you never miss another one. We've got more stories about people navigating impossible situations, making hard choices, and discovering that change is messy but possible. I'll see you in the next story.